The deafening crack of a wooden beam split the air as Elizabeth Addams scrambled through the smoke-filled hallway, her nightgown billowing like a ghost in the inferno that had once been her family's ranch house. In the late spring of 1878, Leadville, Colorado was experiencing an unprecedented dry spell, and it had taken only a single spark from the kitchen stove to transform the Addams homestead into a blazing pyre against the night sky. "Papa!" She screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Mother!" The heat was unbearable, searing her lungs with each desperate breath as she stumbled toward what she hoped was the front door. A thunderous collapse from above sent a shower of embers raining down. Elizabeth raised her arms to shield herself, but it was too late. White-hot cinders struck her face, and pain like she'd never known exploded behind her eyes. Her scream pierced the night as she fell to her knees, hands clawing at her face. Strong arms suddenly enveloped her, lifting her from the floor. "I've got you, miss," a deep voice shouted over the inferno. "Hold on," she felt herself being carried, then the sudden coolness of night air. Distantly, she heard shouts, the splash of water, and the continuing crackle of the fire consuming everything she'd ever known. But all of it was secondary to the relentless agony that had replaced her vision with nothing but darkness. "Elizabeth." It was Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch. "Oh, dear God, someone fetch the doctor, my parents," Elizabeth gasped, reaching out blindly. "Please, they're still inside." A moment of terrible silence answered her before the man who had rescued her spoke again. "I'm sorry, miss, the roof. It's gone. No one could have survived that." The darkness that had claimed her sight seemed to spread through her entire being. As consciousness slipped away, Elizabeth felt herself falling into an abyss deeper than mere blindness could explain. When she awoke, the world remained dark. For one hopeful moment, she thought perhaps it was still night, but the warmth of sunlight on her skin betrayed that comforting lie. She reached up with trembling fingers to touch her face, only to find bandages covering her eyes. "Easy now," came a woman's gentle voice. "Don't disturb those bandages, dear." "Who's there?" Elizabeth whispered, her throat raw from smoke. "Martha Wilson. I'm Doc Wilson's wife. You're in our home in Leadville." The events of the night came rushing back with crushing force. "My parents." The pause told Elizabeth everything before Martha's words confirmed it. "I'm so sorry, child. They didn't make it out." A sob tore from Elizabeth's throat. "And my eyes. Why can't I see?" Martha's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "The doctor has done everything he can for now. The bandages need to stay on for at least a week after that." Her voice trailed off. "After that," Elizabeth pressed. "We'll just have to wait and see, dear." But when the bandages came off a week later, there was nothing to see, only darkness remained. Dr. Wilson spoke of burns to her corneas, damage that might never heal. At 22 years old, Elizabeth Addams had lost everything: her family, her home, and her sight in a single night. The days that followed blurred together in an endless void. She stayed with the Wilsons, who had known her family for years, but their small home could hardly accommodate another person indefinitely. Discussions of sending her to a special home for the blind in Denver floated around her like ghosts. "I won't go," she insisted one evening after overhearing Martha and the doctor discussing arrangements. "This is my home. Leadville is all I have left." "But child," Martha began gently, "how will you manage? Your family's ranch is gone, and with your condition, I'm not an invalid," Elizabeth interrupted, though her voice lacked conviction. In truth, she felt utterly helpless. Simple tasks had become monumental challenges. She couldn't dress herself without assistance, could barely feed herself, and the thought of navigating the world without sight terrified her beyond measure. But the alternative, being shipped off to strangers in a distant city, seemed worse still. It was on the third week after the fire that a knock came at the Wilsons' door. Elizabeth sat in a rocking chair by the window, the warm sunlight on her face providing her only connection to the outside world. "Afternoon, Doc," came a deep voice that sparked a memory in Elizabeth's mind. Heard you had someone staying with you who might need some help. Quinn Jacobsen, Dr. Wilson greeted warmly. Come in, come in. What brings the best rancher in the county to my humble door? Not the best by a long shot, the man, Quinn replied with a chuckle, but I reckon I do all right. Truth is, I'm here about Miss Addams. Elizabeth straightened in her chair, turning toward the sound of his voice. You know me, a pause, then footsteps approached. Yes, madam, I'm Quinn Jacobsen. I own the Double J Ranch about 5 miles south of where your family's place was. Another pause. I was in town the night of the fire. I'm the one who pulled you out. The revelation sent a jolt through Elizabeth. You saved me. Didn't do enough, he replied, his voice heavy with regret. Couldn't get to your folks in time. You risked your life for a stranger, Elizabeth said softly. I never got to thank you. No thanks needed, Miss Addams. Dr. Wilson cleared his throat. Quinn here is one of the finest men in Colorado territory. Came here during the silver rush of '74, but unlike most, he put his earnings into land instead of drink or cards. You flatter me, Doc, Quinn said, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. Miss Addams, I've come because I heard you might be sent to Denver. Elizabeth's fingers clutched the arms of her rocking chair. I don't want to go. That's why I'm here, Quinn continued. I've got a proposition for you. My sister Agnes, she passed last winter, consumption. She was keeping house for me at the ranch, and truth be told, it's been mighty quiet without her. I could use someone to help with the cooking and such. In return, you'd have a place to stay. Elizabeth frowned. I can hardly cook for myself now, Mr. Jacobsen, let alone for others. Call me Quinn, please, he said, and she heard him moving closer. The floorboards creaked as he knelt beside her chair. Miss Addams, Elizabeth, she corrected automatically. Elizabeth, he amended, his voice gentler. I know it seems impossible now. But Agnes, she taught blind children before she came west with me. She always said it was about learning things different, not giving up on learning. A spark of hope, tiny but bright, flickered in Elizabeth's heart. You think I could learn to manage again? I know you could. There was no doubt in his voice, only steadfast confidence that nearly took her breath away. It won't be easy and it'll take time, but if you're willing to try, I'm willing to help. For the first time since the fire, Elizabeth felt something other than despair. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. There was a pause, and when Quinn spoke again, his voice was soft but resolute. My pa used to say a man's measured by what he does when nobody's watching. I've got a big house and land enough, and there's no reason a capable woman should be sent away from her home because of a tragedy. Besides, he added with what sounded like a smile in his voice, I make a terrible biscuit. Despite herself, Elizabeth laughed a rusty sound she barely recognized as her own. Think about it, Quinn said, rising to his feet. I'll come back tomorrow for your answer. After he'd gone, Dr. Wilson sat beside her. Quinn Jacobsen is a good man, Elizabeth. His offer is generous. But what if I can't do it? She whispered. What if I'm nothing but a burden? Quinn wouldn't have offered if he thought that, the doctor replied. And between you and me, that man could use someone to look after him as much as you could use his help. Been alone too long since Agnes died. That night, as Elizabeth lay in bed staring into a darkness that never changed, she considered Quinn's offer. The thought of leaving Leadville, the mountains she could no longer see but knew surrounded her, was unbearable. But so too was the idea of remaining helpless, dependent on charity for the rest of her life. When Quinn returned the next day, Elizabeth was waiting, her few remaining possessions packed in a small carpet bag. I accept your offer, Mr. Jacobsen Quinn, she said, standing as straight as she could manage. But I want to be clear. I won't be a charity case. Once I learn to manage, I'll earn my keep. She couldn't see his expression, but something in the quality of his silence suggested approval. I wouldn't have it any other way, he finally said. Are you ready to leave now? Yes, Elizabeth nodded. Though I should warn you, I'm not much good at finding my way around yet. There was a rustle of movement, and then she felt a large, calloused hand take hers gently. The touch was startling, the first intentional human contact she'd had since the doctor had removed her bandages. Elizabeth, Quinn said, his voice low and sincere, I'll be your eyes, for as long as you need. Something about those simple words, spoken with such quiet certainty, made Elizabeth's throat tighten with emotion. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and allowed Quinn to lead her out of the Wilsons' home and into a future she couldn't see but suddenly wasn't quite so afraid to face. The journey to the Double J Ranch was Elizabeth's first real test. Quinn helped her into his wagon, carefully describing each step so she wouldn't stumble. As they left Leadville behind, he began to narrate the landscape they passed through. We're heading south out of town now, he said, his deep voice steady beside her. The mountains are to our right, all purple and blue in the afternoon light. There's still snow on the highest peaks, even though it's June. Elizabeth closed her useless eyes and tried to picture it. Are there wildflowers yet? Yes, madam, fields of them, blue columbine and yellow sunflowers, Indian paintbrush making red splashes here and there. A smile touched her lips. You have a poet's way of describing things, Quinn, he chuckled, the sound warm and rich. Don't let my ranch hands hear you say that. They'd never let me live it down. As the wagon jolted along the rutted road, Elizabeth learned that Quinn had come to Colorado in 1874 during the silver boom, but unlike most, he'd had no interest in mining. Saw too many men lose themselves to silver fever, he explained. I figured the real fortune was in feeding all those miners, started with 50 acres and 10 head of cattle. Now I've got closer to 500 acres and 100 head. That's impressive, Elizabeth said sincerely. You must work very hard. No harder than anyone else, he replied, though the pride in his voice was unmistakable. I've got good men working for me. Jose's been my foreman for 3 years now. Then there's Willie Harlan and Emmett who help with the cattle. Sarah comes in from town 3 times a week to do laundry and deep cleaning. Elizabeth absorbed this information, trying to prepare herself for meeting these strangers. Will they mind me being there? A blind woman can't be much help on a ranch. The wagon slowed slightly. Anyone who minds will answer to me, Quinn said, his voice suddenly hard. But they won't mind. They're good people. He paused, then added more gently, and don't sell yourself short, Elizabeth. There's more than one way to be useful. They traveled in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. Elizabeth found herself relaxing despite her anxieties, lulled by the rhythm of the journey and Quinn's solid presence beside her. We're coming up on the ranch now, he said eventually. There's a stand of cottonwoods marking the entrance to the property. The house is ahead 2 stories, white clapboard with green shutters. My pa would have called it ostentatious, but Agnes insisted on the shutters. Elizabeth smiled at that. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Quinn agreed, his voice softening with memory. 7 years older than me and bossy as they come, but the kindest heart you'd ever find. She never married, dedicated her life to teaching until her lungs got bad. Doctors said the mountain air might help, so we came west together. The wagon began to slow. Here we are, Quinn announced. Home. The word sent a pang through Elizabeth's heart. Home. Would this strange place ever feel like that to her? Before she could dwell on it, the wagon came to a stop and she heard Quinn set the brake. Footsteps approached rapidly. Boss, didn't expect you back so soon, called a man's voice, the words colored by a Spanish accent. Jose, Quinn greeted. This is Miss Elizabeth Addams. She'll be staying with us from now on. There was a brief pause then. Señorita, welcome to Double J. It is an honor. Elizabeth turned toward the voice and nodded. Thank you, Jose. I appreciate your welcome. Quinn jumped down from the wagon, and a moment later his hands were at her waist, lifting her carefully to the ground. Easy now, he murmured. 3 steps to the front path. Elizabeth allowed herself to be guided, focusing on the sensations beneath her feet as they transitioned from dirt to gravel. The air smelled different here, cleaner than in town, with hints of pine, hay, and the unmistakable scent of cattle in the distance. Jose, let the others know we have a new member of the household, Quinn said. And ask Sarah to come tomorrow instead of Wednesday if she can. She, patron, Jose replied, and Elizabeth heard him walking away. Let me show you the house, Quinn said, offering his arm for Elizabeth to hold. It'll take some getting used to, but we'll go slow. For the next hour, Quinn patiently guided Elizabeth through the main floor of the ranch house, describing each room in detail and helping her create a mental map of the space. The parlor with its stone fireplace, the dining room with a table that could seat 8, the kitchen with its large cast iron stove, and a small study that smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. Your room will be here on the first floor, Quinn explained, leading her into a space that smelled faintly of lavender. It was Agnes's sewing room, but I've had a bed moved in. I thought it would be easier than having you navigate the stairs. Elizabeth ran her hands over the furnishings: a narrow bed, a dresser, a small table, and a rocking chair by the window. It's perfect, she said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. The privy is out back, Quinn continued, but there's a chamber pot under the bed for nighttime. I'll have Jose put a rope line from the back door to the privy tomorrow so you can follow it. The idea of navigating even that short distance alone was intimidating, but Elizabeth nodded resolutely. I need to learn, and you will, Quinn assured her, but not all at once. For tonight you rest. I imagine it's been quite a day for you. It had been, and exhaustion was beginning to set in, but as Quinn turned to leave, anxiety flared in Elizabeth's chest. Quinn, she called, I don't know how to thank you for all this. No need for thanks, he replied. Just having someone else in the house again is payment enough. He paused at the door. I'll bring your supper in here tonight so you don't have to worry about finding your way to the dining room. Tomorrow we can start figuring things out proper. After he left, Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the quilt, trying to ground herself in this new reality. For the first time since the fire, she didn't feel utterly helpless. Terrified still, yes, and mourning all she had lost, but no longer adrift without purpose or hope. Quinn Jacobsen had given her that much already. He'd be her eyes, he'd said. And somehow, despite barely knowing the man, Elizabeth believed him. The first week at the Double J Ranch passed in a blur of new experiences for Elizabeth. True to his word, Quinn devoted himself to helping her adapt to her new circumstances, starting with the basics of navigating the house independently. The key is consistency, he explained on her second morning after bringing her breakfast in bed. Everything has its place, and nothing gets moved without telling you first. He installed knotted ropes along the major pathways of the house from her bedroom to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the parlor, and from the back door to the privy. Each room had its own distinct feel that Elizabeth began to recognize. The cool flagstones of the kitchen, the plush carpet of the parlor, the smooth hardwood of the dining room. Jose constructed a series of raised garden beds behind the kitchen where Elizabeth could grow herbs and vegetables, placing them at waist height so she wouldn't have to bend or kneel blindly. My abuela lost her sight in her old age, Jose told her as he guided her hands to feel the structure he'd built. She still grew the best chilies in Mexico by touch and smell alone. The ranch hands treated her with a mixture of respect and careful consideration. They announced themselves when entering a room where she was present, described things without being asked, and never once made her feel like a burden. But it was Quinn who truly transformed her experience of blindness. Every evening after supper, he would take her arm and lead her outside to sit on the porch swing. Tell me what you hear, he would say. At first, Elizabeth could only discern the most obvious sounds: the creak of the swing, the distant lowing of cattle. But as days passed, her hearing sharpened. She began to distinguish the unique calls of different birds, the rustle of various animals in the underbrush, even the distinctive gaits of each ranch hand as they walked across the yard. The world doesn't disappear just because you can't see it, Quinn told her one evening as they listened to a thunderstorm approaching from the mountains. It just speaks to you differently now. By the end of the second week, Elizabeth had begun to take on simple tasks in the kitchen. Sarah, the housekeeper, showed her how to measure ingredients by touch rather than sight. "Cup your hand like so," Sarah demonstrated, placing Elizabeth's fingers in the right position. "That's about a tablespoon, and when you're measuring flour or sugar, level it with the back of a knife." Elizabeth's first attempts at cooking were disastrous, a batch of biscuits hard enough to serve as doorstops, stew that was more salt than sustenance. But Quinn ate every bite without complaint. "Not bad for a first try," he said, crunching heroically through a biscuit that Elizabeth knew was terrible. "You're a terrible liar, Quinn Jacobsen," she replied, but she was smiling as she said it. "Maybe so," he agreed readily, "but I'm a patient man. Tomorrow's biscuits will be better." And they were, marginally. Each day brought small improvements, not just in cooking but in all aspects of Elizabeth's new life. She learned to identify clothing by texture and to arrange outfits so they would match. She discovered that folding paper in different ways could help her distinguish between important documents. She even began to venture outside alone, following the paths that Quinn and the others had marked for her with stones or rope guides. It was on one such solo expedition, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival at the Double J, that Elizabeth had her first real setback. She had been following the rope line that led to the herb garden when a sudden gust of wind caught her skirt. Distracted, she let go of the rope to smooth her dress and in that moment lost her bearings completely. Panic set in immediately. She turned in what she thought was the direction of the house, but after several steps encountered nothing familiar. The ground beneath her feet changed from the packed dirt of the path to what felt like taller grass. "Quinn," she called out, hating the tremor in her voice. "Jose?" No answer came. Of course not. Quinn had ridden out that morning to check on a section of fence with Willie and Harlan. Jose was in town picking up supplies. Even Sarah wasn't due until tomorrow. Elizabeth forced herself to stand still, fighting down rising terror. Think, she commanded herself. What had Quinn taught her about finding her way? Use your other senses, he had said. The sun on your face tells you direction. The sounds tell you distance. Elizabeth lifted her face, feeling the warmth of the sun. It was afternoon, which meant the sun would be in the west. The house was north of the garden, so she needed to turn right from the sun's warmth. She took a tentative step in what she hoped was the correct direction, then another. The ground began to slope downward, which was wrong. The house was on level ground. She had turned too far, frustration and fear curdled in her stomach. It was happening again, the same helplessness she had felt in the weeks after the fire. All her progress meant nothing if she couldn't even find her way back to the house from the garden. Elizabeth sank to her knees in the grass, tears stinging her useless eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty air. "I can't." She wasn't sure how long she sat there, lost in despair, before the sound of approaching hoofbeats penetrated her misery. A moment later, she heard a horse's snort and the thud of boots hitting the ground. Elizabeth. Quinn's voice was tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" Shame washed over her, almost as powerful as her earlier fear. "No," she managed. "I got lost. I let go of the rope and I couldn't find my way back." There was a rustling sound as Quinn knelt beside her. "You're about 200 yards west of the house," he said gently. "Not far at all." "It might as well be 200 miles, Elizabeth said bitterly. "I couldn't find my way back." "But you were trying," Quinn pointed out. "You were headed in roughly the right direction." His hand found hers, warm and solid. "Getting lost happens to everyone, Elizabeth. The difference is that most folks can see their way back. And I never will again," she said, the words tasting like ashes. Quinn was silent for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he sat down fully in the grass beside her. "Look at me," he said, then immediately grimaced. I know what you mean," Elizabeth interrupted, turning toward his voice. "I told you I'd be your eyes," Quinn said quietly, "and I meant it. But that doesn't mean you'll never find your own way. It just means you don't have to face the darkness alone." Something in his words, in the steadfast certainty of his voice, broke through Elizabeth's despair. "I was doing so well," she whispered. "And then one moment of carelessness and I was helpless again." Not helpless, Quinn corrected firmly. Lost. There's a difference, and being lost isn't the same as being beaten, not unless you give up. Elizabeth wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. How do you always know the right thing to say? Quinn chuckled softly. I don't. Most times I'm just hoping I don't make things worse. His hand squeezed hers gently. Ready to head back to the house, Elizabeth nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. As they walked back, Quinn keeping a steady hand at her elbow, he began to describe a new system of pathways he'd been considering. We could put different textures on the ground, he suggested. Gravel on the path to the barn, smooth stones to the garden, wood chips to the corral. Your feet would tell you where you are, even if you lose the rope. By the time they reached the house, Elizabeth's earlier despair had receded, replaced by a tentative renewal of determination. That evening, as they sat on the porch swing listening to the night sounds of the ranch, Elizabeth found herself acutely aware of Quinn, beside her the subtle scent of his soap mixed with leather and horses, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth that radiated from his body in the cool evening air. Quinn, she said softly, why are you doing all this? Being so patient with me, changing your home, your life to accommodate me. The swing's creaking paused for a moment as Quinn seemed to consider her question. Do you remember what I told you the first day we met? About how my sister taught blind children? Yes, Elizabeth nodded. What I didn't tell you was that Agnes wasn't just a teacher. When she was 16, there was a little girl in our town who was born blind. Everyone said she'd never amount to anything, that she'd be a burden to her family forever. Quinn's voice took on a faraway quality. Agnes wouldn't accept that. She spent every day for 2 years teaching that little girl to navigate the world without sight. By the time the child was 7, she could do nearly everything other children could do, just differently. Elizabeth sat still, absorbing this new information. What happened to the little girl? Last I heard, she was teaching at a school for the blind in Boston, Quinn replied, a smile evident in his voice. Agnes showed me that what most people see as impossible is often just unimaginable to them because they haven't tried hard enough to imagine it. He shifted slightly, and Elizabeth felt him turn toward her. I'm not doing anything special, Elizabeth. I'm just refusing to accept that a woman as strong and capable as you should have to give up on life because of one tragedy. Elizabeth's throat tightened with emotion. You think too highly of me. I think exactly as highly of you as you deserve, Quinn countered softly. Something changed between them that night. Elizabeth couldn't see the way Quinn looked at her, but she could feel a subtle shift in the air, a new awareness that hummed between them whenever they were together. As June gave way to July, Elizabeth's confidence grew along with her abilities. She mastered the layout of the house and nearby outbuildings, learned to cook simple meals without assistance, and even began to help with some of the ranch accounts, using a system of notches Quinn devised to help her identify different ledgers. You have quite a head for figures, he commented one evening as they reviewed the month's expenses. My father taught me, Elizabeth explained, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. He always said a woman should know how to manage money as well as any man. Your father was a wise man. He would have liked you, she said without thinking, then felt heat rise to her cheeks. Quinn was silent for a moment, and Elizabeth wished desperately that she could see his expression. Then his hand covered hers where it rested on the account book. I would have been honored to meet the man who raised such a daughter, he said, his voice low and sincere. The warmth of his hand lingered long after he withdrew it, as did the fluttering sensation in Elizabeth's stomach. The following Sunday, Quinn suggested they attend church services in Leadville. Elizabeth had not left the ranch since her arrival, and the thought of facing the town, facing the pitying stares she couldn't see but could certainly feel, filled her with dread. I don't think I'm ready, she said, twisting her hands in her lap. You don't have to go, Quinn assured her. But the Reverend's been asking after you, and Doc Wilson too. They'd be glad to see you doing well. Elizabeth considered this. Perhaps it was time to venture beyond the safe confines of the ranch. "Will you stay with me?" she asked. "The whole time?" "I won't leave your side," Quinn promised. And so, for the first time in over a month, Elizabeth found herself being helped into Quinn's wagon for the journey to Leadville. She wore her best dress, a navy blue that Sarah assured her brought out the auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, and a bonnet to shield her face. "You look beautiful," Quinn told her as he handed her up to the seat. Something in his tone made Elizabeth believe he meant it truly, not merely as a kindness. The trip into town was nerve-wracking. Elizabeth's knuckles were white where she gripped the seat, every jolt and turn of the wagon reminding her of her vulnerability. Quinn kept up a steady stream of narration, describing the changing landscape and the approaching town, but it did little to calm her nerves. As they entered Leadville, the sounds and smells of the bustling mining town washed over her. The clang of metal from the blacksmith shop, the shouts of children playing in the street, the mingled aromas of bread from the bakery and smoke from the saloon, all of it both familiar and strangely new, experienced now through senses other than sight. The wagon slowed as Quinn guided it through the crowded Main Street. "People are looking," Elizabeth murmured, shrinking slightly in her seat. "They're just surprised to see you," Quinn replied. "News travels fast in small towns. Everyone knows what happened." "And what I've become," she added quietly. Quinn's hand came to rest briefly on hers. "What you've become is even stronger than you were before. Remember that." They arrived at the small white church at the edge of town just as the bells were ringing to call the faithful to worship. Quinn helped Elizabeth down from the wagon, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm as they approached the steps. "Quinn Jacobsen, is that you with Miss Addams?" called a familiar voice. "Dr. Wilson." "Morning, Doc," Quinn greeted. "Beautiful day for worship, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," the doctor replied, coming closer. "Elizabeth, my dear, you're a sight for sore eyes. Martha will be over the moon to see you." Elizabeth managed to smile, though her stomach was in knots. "How is Mrs. Wilson, fretting over you constantly?" the doctor chuckled. "She'll want to hear everything about your stay at the Double J. She was so pleased when Quinn offered to take you in." Quinn guided her carefully up the church steps, murmuring warnings about each one. Inside, the church fell into a hush as they entered, and Elizabeth could feel the weight of unseen stares. Quinn's arm tightened reassuringly beneath her hand. "The third pew on the left is empty," he whispered, leading her forward. They had just settled into their seats when Elizabeth heard a rustle of skirts and a familiar voice exclaimed, "Elizabeth!" A moment later, Martha Wilson's arms were around her in a warm embrace that smelled of lavender water and baking. "My dear girl," Martha said as she pulled back. "Let me look at you. Why, you're positively glowing. Country air must agree with you." Elizabeth smiled, touched by the older woman's enthusiasm. "It's good to hear your voice, Mrs. Wilson. I've missed you." "And we've missed you terribly," Martha assured her. "You must tell me everything. Is Quinn taking good care of you? Are you eating properly?" "Have you, Martha?" Dr. Wilson interrupted with fond exasperation. Perhaps this conversation could wait until after the service. As if on cue, the organ began to play, signaling the start of worship. Martha squeezed Elizabeth's hand once more before moving to her own seat. Throughout the service, Quinn remained a solid presence beside Elizabeth, quietly indicating when to stand or sit, finding the right pages in the hymnal and guiding her fingers to the verses. After the final prayer, Elizabeth braced herself for what she knew would come: the well-meaning but often awkward interactions with townspeople who had known her before. "Ready," Quinn murmured as the congregation began to stir. "As I'll ever be," Elizabeth replied, gripping his arm perhaps a bit more tightly than necessary. For the next hour she weathered a storm of sympathetic greetings, awkward questions, and thinly veiled pity. Some people spoke too loudly, as if blindness had affected her hearing. Others addressed their questions to Quinn rather than to her directly, as though she had lost her mind along with her sight. Through it all, Quinn remained steadfastly at her side. gently but firmly redirecting conversations back to Elizabeth when people tried to talk over or around her. "Miss Addams is managing quite well," he would say, a hint of steel beneath his polite tone. "Why don't you ask her yourself how she's finding life at the ranch?" By the time they finally extricated themselves and headed toward the wagon, Elizabeth was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She had survived her first public outing since losing her sight, and while it hadn't been easy, it hadn't been the unbearable ordeal she had feared either. "Quinn Jacobsen," a woman's voice called out as they reached the wagon. "Hold up a moment," Quinn stiffened slightly beside Elizabeth. "Abigail," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Good morning." "Hardly saw you at church," the woman Abigail replied, her voice coming closer, "though I suppose you were rather occupied." There was something in her tone that made Elizabeth uneasy. "Miss Addams needed assistance," Quinn said simply. "Elizabeth, this is Abigail Harper. Her father owns the mercantile." "A pleasure," Elizabeth said, extending her hand in the direction of the woman's voice. There was a brief pause before cool fingers clasped hers in a perfunctory shake. "Likewise. Quinn, I was hoping to speak with you about the upcoming Founders' Day celebration. The committee was hoping you might donate one of your steers for the barbecue as you did last year." "I'd be happy to," Quinn replied. "Send word out to the ranch with your requirements." "I could ride out myself," Abigail suggested, her voice taking on a honeyed quality that made Elizabeth's spine stiffen. "It's been an age since I've seen the improvements you've made to the house." A silent moment stretched between them before Quinn answered. "I'm afraid I'll be quite occupied these next few weeks. Jose can handle the arrangements when you send them." Even Elizabeth, who couldn't see the exchange of looks that must have accompanied this conversation, could sense the tension humming in the air. "Very well," Abigail finally said, her tone considerably cooler. "Good day to you both." As they rode back to the ranch, Elizabeth couldn't help but ask, "Who was that woman, Abigail Harper?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "The daughter of Leadville's wealthiest merchant, we courted briefly about a year ago." "Oh," Elizabeth said, unsure why this information caused a strange twist in her chest. "She seemed quite familiar with you still." Quinn made a noncommittal sound. "Abigail tends to believe what she wants to believe." He paused, then added more gently, "It ended some time ago. She wanted a husband who would move her to Denver or even back east. I'm too attached to my land for that." Elizabeth nodded, oddly relieved. "I can understand that. The land becomes part of you after a while." "Exactly so," Quinn agreed, sounding pleased that she understood. "A man can't just walk away from something he's built with his own hands, something that's grown under his care." As they continued toward the ranch, a comfortable silence fell between them. Elizabeth found herself reflecting on the day, on how different it had felt to navigate the world she had once known by sight, and on how Quinn's steady presence had transformed what could have been an ordeal into something manageable. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "For today." "For everything, really." Quinn's hand briefly covered hers where it rested on the seat between them. "No thanks needed," he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Though I will say, you handled yourself admirably back there. I was proud to be seen with you." The simple sincerity in his voice warmed Elizabeth more than the summer sun on her face. For the first time since the fire, she found herself thinking not just of surviving one day at a time, but of a future that might hold more than mere existence. The summer progressed, bringing scorching days and the occasional violent thunderstorm that rolled down from the mountains with little warning. Elizabeth continued to expand her capabilities, venturing farther from the house alone and taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. She learned to identify each animal by sound and smell the distinctive nicker of Quinn's stallion Thunderhead, the soft lowing of the milk cow Bessie, even the various chickens that provided eggs for the kitchen. "I swear that red hen sounds completely different from the others," she told Quinn one morning after collecting eggs without assistance for the first time. "Never thought about it before," Quinn admitted, "but you're right. She's always been the noisiest of the bunch." Elizabeth smiled, pleased by this small victory. I'll call her Melody then. Might be the first time a chicken earned a name around here, Quinn chuckled. Usually they're just Sunday dinner. Elizabeth gasped in mock horror. You wouldn't dare cook Melody. Not if she keeps laying eggs like this, Quinn assured her, and Elizabeth could hear the smile in his voice. These moments of easy camaraderie had become the highlight of her days. Quinn never treated her blindness as a tragedy, merely as a fact to be worked around. He described sunsets to her in such vivid detail that she could almost see them, told her when wildflowers bloomed in the meadows, and narrated the progress of a family of foxes that had made their den near the creek. In return, Elizabeth brought a warmth back to the ranch house that had been missing since Agnes's death. She filled the rooms with the aroma of fresh baked bread, learned to play the small piano in the parlor by ear, and created a home that the ranch hands began to linger in rather than hurrying back to their bunkhouse after the day's work. Place feels different with you here, Jose told her one evening as she served coffee after supper. Like a real home again, not just a house. Elizabeth felt a flush of pleasure at his words. Thank you, Jose, I'm glad to be useful. More than useful, señorita, he replied. Necessary. It was a simple word, but it struck Elizabeth deeply. Necessary. Not a burden, not an object of pity, but someone whose presence mattered, whose contribution was valued. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth made her way carefully to the porch, following the guide rope Quinn had installed along the walls. The summer night was warm, filled with the symphony of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. She settled into the porch swing, gently pushing off with her foot to set it in motion. These quiet moments alone had become precious to her, times when she could reflect on how far she had come and allow herself to hope for what might still lie ahead. The creak of the front door startled her from her thoughts. Elizabeth, Quinn's voice was rough with sleep. Everything all right? Yes, she assured him quickly. I couldn't sleep. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. You didn't, he said, and she heard his bare feet pad across the porch boards. Mind if I join you? Please do. The swing dipped as Quinn settled beside her, his warm presence instantly comforting. He smelled of sleep and the faint remnants of the soap. He used something clean with hints of bay leaves. Beautiful night, he observed. Stars as thick as spilled salt across the sky. Elizabeth smiled, tilting her head back as if she could see them. Tell me about them. Quinn's voice softened as he described the constellations wheeling overhead, the bright slash of the Milky Way, the occasional streak of a falling star. Elizabeth listened, creating images in her mind to match his words. I used to take them for granted, Quinn admitted after a while. The stars, the sunsets, all of it, never really looked properly until I started describing them to you. Elizabeth turned toward him, surprised. Really? Really, he confirmed. Seeing through your ears has made me see better with my eyes. He paused, then added quietly, Agnes used to say that too about teaching blind children, said they taught her more than she ever taught them. She sounds like she was very wise. She was, Quinn agreed. She would have liked you tremendously. Another pause, longer this time. Elizabeth, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Elizabeth's heart quickened. Yes, the Founders' Day celebration is coming up in 2 weeks. There'll be a dance in town, fireworks, the whole affair. Would you? That is, I'd be honored if you'd accompany me. The request caught Elizabeth off guard. A dance? Quinn, I can't dance anymore. I'd be a disaster. Nonsense, he said firmly. You can still hear the music, can't you? And I'm a passable dancer. I won't let you fall or bump into anything. But everyone will stare, Elizabeth protested. The blind woman trying to dance. Let them stare, Quinn replied, a hint of steel entering his voice. They'll be looking at the bravest woman in Colorado territory as far as I'm concerned. Besides, he added, his tone softening, I'd like to dance with you, Elizabeth, very much. The simple admission sent a warmth spreading through Elizabeth's chest. Then yes, she found herself saying. I'd be honored to accompany you, Quinn Jacobsen. The swing creaked gently as they sat together in companionable silence. the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Elizabeth was acutely aware of Quinn beside her, the rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifting of his weight, the slight brush of his arm against hers. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out, her hand finding his where it rested on the swing between them. Quinn's fingers immediately entwined with hers, warm and solid and reassuring. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. In that quiet moment under the stars she couldn't see, Elizabeth felt a certainty taking root within her, a growing understanding of what this man was coming to mean to her, and perhaps what she might mean to him. The Founders' Day celebration arrived on a perfect late July day. Elizabeth had spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation, allowing Sarah to help her prepare with special care. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, with soft curls framing her face, and she wore a new dress Quinn had surprised her with sage green silk that Sarah assured her brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. "Though those don't much matter now," Elizabeth had said with a sad smile. "They matter to Mr. Jacobsen," Sarah had replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "He notices." Now, as Quinn helped her down from the wagon in the center of Leadville, Elizabeth felt a flutter of anxiety. The town square was alive with sounds and smells, children laughing, musicians tuning their instruments, the mouth-watering aroma of barbecued beef and fresh corn. "It's quite a crowd," Quinn observed, tucking Elizabeth's hand securely into the crook of his arm. "The whole county must be here." "Describe it to me," Elizabeth requested, clinging to his arm as they began to walk. Quinn obliged, painting a vivid picture with his words. "They've decorated the square with bunting red, white, and blue hanging from every lamppost and storefront. There's a platform set up for the band at the north end and tables loaded with food along the east side. Children are running everywhere, some with hoops and tops, others playing tag between the tables." As they moved through the crowd, people called out greetings. Elizabeth was pleased to note that the interactions felt more natural than they had at church, fewer awkward pauses, less obvious pity in the voices that addressed her. "Elizabeth, Quinn," Martha Wilson's familiar voice approached. "How wonderful to see you both." The doctor's wife embraced Elizabeth warmly, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "My dear, you look absolutely radiant. That dress is perfect for you." Elizabeth smiled, touched by the older woman's enthusiasm. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Quinn chose it, did he now?" Martha replied, a note of pleased surprise in her voice. "Well, Mr. Jacobsen, I must say you have excellent taste." Quinn cleared his throat, sounding uncharacteristically flustered. "Just thought the color would suit her." "It does indeed," Martha agreed. "Now, Elizabeth, you must try some of my apple pie before it's all gone. The judging is in an hour, and I have high hopes this year." The afternoon passed in a whirl of conversations, delicious food, and the vibrant atmosphere of celebration. Quinn remained constantly at Elizabeth's side, describing the activities she couldn't see, guiding her through the crowds, and ensuring she was included in every conversation. As evening approached, the band began tuning up in earnest, and Quinn leaned close to Elizabeth's ear. "They're clearing the center of the square for dancing. Are you ready?" Elizabeth swallowed hard. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But yes," Quinn's hand tightened reassuringly around hers. "Just follow my lead. I won't let anything happen to you." He guided her to the edge of the dancing area, waiting as the band struck up a lively Virginia reel. "Let's wait for something slower," he suggested. They didn't have to wait long. Soon, the tempo changed and the soft strains of a waltz filled the air. Quinn turned to face Elizabeth, placing her hand on his shoulder and taking her other hand in his. "My right hand is at your waist," he murmured. "I'll guide you with gentle pressure. Small steps at first." Elizabeth nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. As they began to move, she focused intently on following Quinn's lead, her body tense with concentration. "You're doing fine," Quinn assured her after a few moments. "Try to relax, feel the music." Gradually, Elizabeth allowed herself to be swept up in the rhythm, trusting Quinn to guide her safely. His hand at her waist was steady and sure, his steps predictable as they moved in a small circle. "See," Quinn said softly, "you're dancing." And she was. The realization brought a smile to Elizabeth's face, then a delighted laugh that escaped before she could suppress it. She felt Quinn's answering chuckle, the sound rumbling in his chest where their bodies were close. "I never thought I'd dance again," she confessed, the words meant only for his ears. Quinn's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "There are a lot of things you'll do again, Elizabeth. Differently, perhaps, but no less fully." As the waltz continued, Elizabeth became aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere around them. The buzz of conversation had dimmed, and she had the distinct impression they were being watched. "People are staring, aren't they?" she whispered. "Yes," Quinn admitted. "But not for the reason you think. You look beautiful, Elizabeth, radiant. That's what they're seeing." Before she could respond, the waltz ended and polite applause filled the square. Quinn kept her hand firmly in his as they moved to the edge of the dance floor. "Quinn," a female voice intruded, one Elizabeth recognized immediately, Abigail Harper. "What a surprise to see you dancing. You always claimed to have 2 left feet when I asked you." There was an edge beneath the woman's honeyed tone that made Elizabeth instinctively step closer to Quinn's side. "Evening, Abigail," Quinn replied evenly. "You remember Miss Addams?" "Of course," Abigail said, her voice cooling several degrees. "How inspiring to see you out in society, Miss Addams. It must be so difficult for you." Elizabeth lifted her chin, refusing to be pitied. "Not at all with the right partner." There was a charged silence before Abigail spoke again. "Well, I won't keep you. I'm sure managing in your condition requires Quinn's complete attention." "Miss Addams doesn't require management," Quinn said, his voice taking on the hard edge Elizabeth had rarely heard. "She manages quite well herself." Another strained silence, then Abigail murmured a terse goodbye and moved away. Elizabeth felt Quinn's posture relax beside her. "I apologize for that," he said quietly. "Abigail can be jealous," Elizabeth suggested. Quinn made a surprised sound. "I was going to say difficult, but perhaps you're right." He paused. "Does that bother you?" Elizabeth considered the question honestly. "No," she finally replied. "Should it?" Quinn's hand found hers again, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles in a gesture that sent warmth cascading through her. "No," he said simply. "It shouldn't." The evening continued with more dancing, including a lively polka that left Elizabeth breathless with laughter, and a slower waltz during which Quinn held her closer than was strictly proper. As darkness fell completely, the crowd began to shift toward the edge of town, where the fireworks display would take place. "Would you like to watch the fireworks?" Quinn asked, then winced at his choice of words. "I mean, I know what you mean," Elizabeth assured him, squeezing his arm. "And yes, I would. You can be my eyes, remember?" They found a quieter spot away from the densest part of the crowd, on a small rise that Quinn assured her offered an excellent view. As they waited for the display to begin, Elizabeth found herself reflecting on how far she had come in the months since the fire. From complete despair to this moment of genuine happiness, it seemed almost miraculous. "Penny for your thoughts," Quinn said softly beside her. "I was just thinking about the night we met," Elizabeth replied. "How lost I felt then, how different everything is now." Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Different better, I hope, different better," she confirmed. "Thanks to you, not me," Quinn contradicted gently. "Your own strength did that. I just provided a safe place for you to find it again." Before Elizabeth could respond, the first boom of fireworks echoed across the valley, followed by appreciative ahs from the crowd. "It's gold," Quinn said immediately, his voice close to her ear. "Like a fountain of golden sparks shooting up and then cascading down in a wide arc." Another boom, louder this time, blue and red together, exploding like a starburst. "The blue is deep, like the sky just before full dark. The red is bright as a cardinal's wing." As the display continued, Quinn described each explosion in vivid detail, his words creating images in Elizabeth's mind as clear as if she could see them herself. The warmth of his body beside her, the rumble of his voice in her ear, the clean scent of him mingling with gunpowder in the air, all of it combined to create a moment of perfect contentment. When the final barrage of fireworks illuminated the sky in what Quinn described as every color imaginable, like God himself decided to paint the heavens, Elizabeth found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Quinn's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her gently against his side. "For what?" "For helping me see beauty again, even in darkness." Quinn was silent for a long moment, and Elizabeth wished desperately that she could see his expression. Then, with deliberate care, his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "there is more beauty in your courage than in any sunset or firework I've ever seen." Her breath caught at his words, at the sincerity that vibrated through them. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quinn leaned in. Elizabeth felt the soft brush of his breath against her lips an instant before his mouth met hers in a kiss so tender it made her heart ache. It was brief, almost chaste, but when Quinn pulled back, Elizabeth felt changed by it. They stood together under the star-filled sky. Neither could now fully see he because his eyes were only for her. She because the darkness that had claimed her sight could never claim the light he had rekindled in her heart. The weeks following Founders' Day brought subtle but profound changes to Elizabeth and Quinn's relationship. Nothing was openly declared, but the shift was unmistakable in the lingering touch of hands during the passing of a dish at dinner, in the way Quinn's voice softened when he spoke her name, in the new habit they developed of sitting together on the porch swing each evening, often in comfortable silence broken only by the gentle creak of the chains. On a particularly warm August evening, as they sat listening to the distant rumble of an approaching thunderstorm, Quinn suddenly took Elizabeth's hand in his. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Elizabeth's heart quickened. "What is it?" "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," Quinn assured her quickly. "It's just, I received a letter today from your aunt in Boston." Elizabeth stiffened in surprise. "Aunt Gertrude, how did she even know where I was?" Doc Wilson wrote to her after the fire, Quinn explained. "He thought she should know what happened. She's been corresponding with him about your welfare ever since." "I barely know her," Elizabeth said, bewildered. "She and my mother had a falling out years ago." Quinn's thumb moved gently over her knuckles. "She wants you to come live with her in Boston. She says she has connections to a school for the blind there, doctors who might be able to help with your condition." The words fell between them like stones, heavy with implication. Elizabeth sat very still, her mind racing. "She wants me to leave Colorado?" "Yes," Quinn confirmed, his voice carefully neutral. "She's offering you a chance at a different life, Elizabeth, perhaps a better one." Elizabeth withdrew her hand from his, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm evening air. "And what do you think I should do?" Quinn was silent for a long moment. "I think," he finally said, each word measured, "that you have to decide what kind of future you want." "That's not an answer," Elizabeth replied, a hint of frustration coloring her voice. "No, it's not," Quinn agreed, "because it's not my place to answer." "This is your life, Elizabeth, your choice." The distant thunder grew louder, mirroring the tumult in Elizabeth's heart. "But surely you have an opinion." Another pause, longer this time. "My opinion is complicated," Quinn finally admitted. "As your friend, I want what's best for you. If that's Boston with doctors and schools and your aunt's connections, then that's what I want for you." "And as more than my friend," Elizabeth pressed, her voice barely audible above the approaching storm. Quinn exhaled slowly. "As more than your friend," he repeated, "I can't bear the thought of you leaving, but I won't hold you here out of my own selfishness." The honesty of his admission struck Elizabeth deeply. She reached out, searching for him, and Quinn immediately took her hands in his. "Quinn Jacobsen," she said softly, "do you truly believe I'd be happier in Boston than here, with strangers instead of you?" Quinn's hands tightened around hers. "I don't know," he admitted. I only know that I want you to have every opportunity, every chance at happiness, even if that means giving me up." Elizabeth finished for him. "Yes," Quinn said simply, the word clearly costing him. Elizabeth shook her head, a smile forming despite the seriousness of the moment. "For a smart man, you can be remarkably dense sometimes." Before Quinn could respond, she leaned forward, her hands finding his shoulders, then his face, fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. With careful deliberation, she brought her lips to his in a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words of her decision. When they finally parted, the thunder was directly overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain were beginning to fall. "I'm not going to Boston," Elizabeth said firmly. "My place is here, with you." Quinn's forehead came to rest against hers, his breath warm on her face. "Are you certain? I don't want you to ever regret. The only thing I would regret," Elizabeth interrupted, "is leaving the man I love for a life among strangers." Quinn went very still. "The man you love," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Elizabeth confirmed, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I love you, Quinn. I think perhaps I have since you took my hand and promised to be my eyes." Quinn's response was to kiss her again, more deeply this time, his arms drawing her close against him as the rain began to fall in earnest around the shelter of the porch. "I love you, Elizabeth Addams," he murmured against her lips. "More than I thought possible. Stay with me. Not as my housekeeper or my friend, but as my wife. If you'll have me." Elizabeth's answer was another kiss, her hands clutching the front of his shirt as the storm broke fully around them, a cleansing downpour that seemed to wash away the last of her doubts and fears. Later, after the rain had passed, and the night air was filled with the fresh scent of wet earth, and the chorus of frogs celebrating the moisture, Quinn and Elizabeth sat together on the porch swing, making plans for their future. "We should wait until harvest is over for the wedding," Quinn suggested, his arm around Elizabeth's shoulders. "That'll give us time to prepare properly." "October, then," Elizabeth agreed. "When the aspens are turning gold, you always say." Quinn pressed a kiss to her temple. "You'll make a beautiful bride, though I'm sorry you won't see the aspen yourself." "I'll see them through you," Elizabeth replied. "That's enough." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "There's something else we should discuss. Your aunt's letter mentioned doctors in Boston who might be able to help with your eyes." Elizabeth sighed. "Quinn, I've accepted my blindness. Dr. Wilson said the damage was permanent." "Dr. Wilson is a good man and a fine physician," Quinn agreed, "but he's not a specialist. There are doctors back east who have made great strides in treating eye injuries. We could at least consult them." Elizabeth considered this. She had made her peace with never seeing again, had learned to navigate her new world through other senses. The thought of raising false hopes only to have them dashed seemed more painful than accepting her current reality. "Would it matter to you," she asked quietly, "if I never see again?" "Not in the way you mean," Quinn replied immediately. "I fell in love with you as you are. But if there's even a small chance of restoring your sight, don't we owe it to ourselves to try?" Elizabeth reached for his hand, finding it immediately as though her fingers had memorized the exact space he occupied beside her. "You're right," she conceded. "After the wedding, we could travel east. Not to stay with Aunt Gertrude," she added with a small smile, "but to consult these doctors." Quinn brought her hand to his lips. "That's all I ask, and whatever the outcome, we'll face it together." The ranch came alive with wedding preparations as summer gave way to fall. Word spread quickly through Leadville and the surrounding area that Quinn Jacobsen, one of the most eligible bachelors in the county, was to marry Elizabeth Addams, the brave young woman who had overcome such tragedy. Martha Wilson appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, descending on the ranch several times a week with fabric samples, flower arrangements, and endless lists of details that needed attention. "Martha," Elizabeth laughed one afternoon as the older woman described yet another type of lace for the wedding gown, "I can't see any of these samples." "Perhaps not," Martha admitted, "but you can feel the differences." And besides, Quinn will see you and so will everyone else. Elizabeth relented, allowing Martha to guide her hand over the various fabrics, choosing based on texture rather than appearance. In the end, they settled on a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace accents, simple but elegant. Quinn, for his part, threw himself into making the ranch house as accessible as possible for his future wife. He installed more guide ropes, created raised markings on important doors and cabinets, and even commissioned a special set of kitchen implements with distinctive handles that Elizabeth could identify by touch alone. "You're going to spoil me," she protested when he presented her with the custom-made tools. "That's the general idea," Quinn replied with a smile in his voice. "Get used to it, future Mrs. Jacobsen." The name sent a thrill through Elizabeth every time she heard it. Mrs. Jacobsen, Quinn's wife. It seemed almost miraculous that she had found such happiness in the wake of such devastating loss. As the wedding day approached, Elizabeth experienced occasional moments of doubt, not about Quinn, never about Quinn, but about her ability to be a proper wife to him. How would she manage if they had children? Would the ranch hands eventually tire of making allowances for her blindness? Would Quinn himself, despite his protestations to the contrary, one day regret tying himself to a woman with such limitations? These fears came to a head one evening in early October, just 2 weeks before the wedding. Quinn found Elizabeth sitting alone on the porch, unusually quiet after dinner. "Something troubling you?" he asked, settling beside her on the swing. Elizabeth hesitated, then decided that honesty was the only way forward in their relationship. "I'm afraid," she admitted. Quinn's hand found hers immediately. "Of what, love? Of failing you, of not being the wife you deserve, of being a burden instead of a helpmate." Quinn was silent for a moment, then stood abruptly. "Come with me," he said, helping her to her feet. "Where are we going?" Elizabeth asked as he guided her down the porch steps and across the yard. "You'll see, or not see, as the case may be," Quinn replied cryptically. They walked for several minutes, Quinn describing the path so Elizabeth wouldn't stumble. Finally, they stopped, and Elizabeth heard the creak of a door being opened. "The barn?" she asked, recognizing the familiar smells of hay and horses. "Yes," Quinn confirmed, leading her inside. "Now wait here a moment." Elizabeth stood still, listening as Quinn moved around the barn, gathering something. When he returned to her side, he placed something soft and silky into her hands. "A blindfold?" she asked, puzzled as her fingers explored the fabric. "Put it on me," Quinn instructed. Elizabeth frowned in confusion but did as he asked, carefully tying the silk scarf around Quinn's eyes. "Why am I blindfolding you?" "Because," Quinn said, taking her hands in his, "for the next hour I'm going to live in your world, and you're going to show me how you navigate it." Understanding dawned on Elizabeth. "You want me to guide you. I want you to teach me," Quinn corrected. "I want to understand your experience, not just imagine it, and I want you to truly see how capable you've become." Over the next hour, Elizabeth led Quinn through the ranch house and yard, describing things as he had so often described them to her. She guided his hands to identify objects by touch, taught him to count steps between landmarks, showed him how to listen for subtle sounds that indicated location and distance. Quinn stumbled often, bumped into furniture, and once nearly walked into a wall, but he never complained, never removed the blindfold. He followed Elizabeth's instructions with the same patience she had shown when their roles were reversed. Finally, they returned to the porch swing where Quinn removed the blindfold at last. "Well," Elizabeth asked, anxiety creeping back into her voice. "What do you think?" Quinn's hands came up to frame her face gently. "I think," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. What you navigate every day without complaint or self-pity would defeat most people, including me." "But no," Quinn interrupted firmly. "Listen to me, Elizabeth, you are not a burden. You never have been, and you never will be. You've overcome more in these past months than most people face in a lifetime. You've created a new way of living, of experiencing the world. That isn't weakness, it's extraordinary strength." Elizabeth blinked back tears. "I just want to be a good wife to you. And you will be," Quinn assured her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Not in spite of your blindness, but including it. It's part of who you are now, part of the woman I love. I don't want you to be anyone else." As his lips found hers in a tender kiss, Elizabeth felt the last of her doubts melt away. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, she with her hard-won resilience, he with his steadfast devotion. It was enough, more than enough. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill in the air to redden cheeks, but not enough to cause discomfort. The Double J Ranch had been transformed for the occasion, with bunting and flowers decorating the yard, tables set up for the feast that would follow the ceremony, and a wooden platform constructed for dancing. In Elizabeth's room, Martha Wilson and Sarah fussed over the bride, arranging her hair and helping her into the ivory silk gown that felt as light as air against her skin. "You look absolutely beautiful," Martha declared, her voice suspiciously thick. "Quinn won't be able to take his eyes off you." "Is there a good turnout?" Elizabeth asked nervously, fingering the small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers and aspen leaves that Quinn had personally collected for her. "Half of Leadville is here," Sarah confirmed, "and all the neighboring ranchers too. It's the event of the season." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Is the bride ready?" called Dr. Wilson. "The groom is getting mighty anxious out here." "Coming, dear," Martha replied. She pressed a quick kiss to Elizabeth's cheek. "It's time, my dear, your new life awaits." With Martha on one side and Dr. Wilson on the other, Elizabeth made her way out of the house and across the yard to where the ceremony would take place. She could hear the murmur of many voices, the occasional cough or rustle of clothing as people shifted in their seats. Then a violin began to play. Willie from the bunkhouse was quite accomplished and the crowd fell silent. "Quinn is waiting for you at the end of the aisle," Dr. Wilson murmured. Reverend Taylor beside him. "It's about 20 steps straight ahead." Elizabeth nodded, taking a deep breath. The doctor offered his arm, ready to escort her in the absence of her father, but Elizabeth hesitated. "Wait," she said. "I'd like to try something." Martha made a concerned sound. "Elizabeth, dear, now isn't the time to, please," Elizabeth insisted. "I need to do this." After a moment, Dr. Wilson relented. "Very well, but we're right here if you need us." Elizabeth stood straighter, her head high. "Quinn," she called, her voice clear in the hushed yard. "I'm here, Elizabeth," came his immediate response, and the love in those 3 simple words gave her all the courage she needed. "Guide me," she requested. There was a brief pause, then Quinn's deep voice began to speak, calm and steady. 20 steps straight ahead, my love. The aisle is clear, with people seated on either side. I'm waiting for you at the end, with the Reverend beside me and the mountains behind us." With those beloved words directing her, Elizabeth began to walk forward, her steps slow but sure. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible, but Elizabeth barely noticed, focused entirely on Quinn's voice. 15 more steps. You're doing wonderfully. The sun is catching the gold in your hair, making it shine like autumn leaves." Elizabeth continued forward, a smile spreading across her face as Quinn continued to narrate her journey. 10 more steps. You look absolutely beautiful, Elizabeth, like a dream come true. She could hear the emotion in his voice now, the slight roughness that betrayed deep feeling. Her own eyes filled with tears of joy. 5 more steps. I can't believe how lucky I am. Elizabeth counted the remaining steps in her head, and then Quinn's hands were taking hers, warm and solid and real. You're here, he whispered, just for her. I'm here, she confirmed. You guided me. As I always will, he promised, raising her hands to his lips. The ceremony that followed was simple but deeply meaningful. Reverend Taylor spoke of love that endures through all trials, of partnerships that strengthen rather than diminish the individuals within them, of faith that lights the darkest paths. When it came time for their vows, Quinn went first, his voice unwavering as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Elizabeth for all his days, to be her strength when she needed it, and to celebrate her independence when she didn't, to see the world for her and with her until death parted them. Elizabeth's voice trembled slightly as she began her own vows, but grew stronger with each word. Quinn Jacobsen, you found me in darkness and showed me there was still light to be found. You never saw my blindness as the end of my story, but merely as a new chapter. You taught me to trust again in myself, in others, in the future. I promise to be your wife in every sense of the word, to build our home and family together, to face whatever joys and sorrows life brings us side by side, and to love you with every beat of my heart until my last breath. There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering when Reverend Taylor pronounced them husband and wife. Quinn's kiss was gentle but full of promise, his hands cradling Elizabeth's face as though she were made of the most precious porcelain. The celebration that followed was joyous and unrestrained. Food and drink flowed freely. Music filled the air, and everyone from the wealthiest Leadville merchant to the youngest ranch hand wished the couple well. Even Abigail Harper made an appearance, offering stiff congratulations that Elizabeth accepted with gracious dignity. I hope you'll be very happy, Quinn, Abigail said, her voice carefully controlled. I already am, Quinn replied simply, his arm secure around Elizabeth's waist. As evening approached, Quinn led his bride onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. Unlike at the Founders' Day celebration, Elizabeth moved with confidence now, following Quinn's lead without fear or hesitation. Did I tell you today that I love you, Mrs. Jacobsen? Quinn murmured as they swayed to the gentle music. Several times, Elizabeth replied with a smile. But I'll never tire of hearing it. Good, Quinn said, pulling her closer. Because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Quinn led Elizabeth away from the noise and bustle toward a quiet spot near the edge of the property. Where are we going? She asked, curious but trusting. Somewhere private, Quinn replied. I have a wedding gift for you. They walked a short distance until the sounds of the party were muted by distance. Quinn brought them to a stop and Elizabeth heard the distinctive creak of a door. A cabin? She asked, detecting the scent of fresh cut wood. Our cabin, Quinn corrected, guiding her inside. I've been building it for the past month. I thought we might want a place of our own separate from the main house, somewhere private to begin our marriage. Elizabeth's hands reached out, exploring the space. It was small but solidly built, with a stone fireplace, a bed that felt large and comfortable when her fingers brushed it, and simple but sturdy furnishings. Quinn, she breathed, overwhelmed by this tangible evidence of his love. It's perfect. Everything is arranged for you, he explained, leading her around the single room. Guide ropes, marked edges, everything you need. And I've oriented it so the morning sun will warm the bed and the evening breeze will cool it. Elizabeth turned to him, her heart so full she could barely speak. Thank you, she managed, reaching up to touch his face. For this, for everything. Quinn caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. This is just the beginning, Elizabeth, just the beginning of our life together. As he drew her into his arms, Elizabeth knew with absolute certainty that while she might never again see with her eyes, she saw more clearly than ever before with her heart, saw the boundless possibilities of a future built on love, trust, and unwavering partnership with this remarkable man who had promised to be her eyes and had given her so much more. 10 years later, the Double J Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in Colorado. The original 100 head of cattle had multiplied to nearly 500. The acreage had expanded to include some of the richest grazing land in the territory, and the ranch house had been enlarged to accommodate a growing family. On a warm June morning, Elizabeth Jacobsen sat on the front porch, her fingers nimbly braiding her daughter's hair while her son played at her feet with wooden horses Quinn had carved for him. "Mama," 7-year-old Catherine said, "tell us again how you and Papa met." Elizabeth smiled, her hands never faltering in their task despite her blindness. "Well, it was a terrible night. There was a fire at my family's ranch and I was trapped inside. And Papa saved you. 5-year-old Thomas interjected excitedly. He'd heard the story dozens of times but never tired of it. Yes, he did, Elizabeth confirmed, tying off Catherine's braid with a ribbon. He carried me out of the burning house, but I had been hurt, and when I woke up, I couldn't see any more. Catherine leaned back against her mother's knees. Were you very scared? I was, Elizabeth admitted. I didn't know how I would manage, but then your father came to visit me, and do you remember what he said? I'll be your eyes. Both children chorused. Elizabeth laughed, reaching down to ruffle Thomas's hair. That's right. And he kept that promise. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Papa's home, Thomas cried, scrambling to his feet. And Uncle Will with him, Catherine added, her voice taking on a tone of importance that made Elizabeth smile. Her daughter had developed quite a hero worship for Quinn's younger brother, who had joined them at the ranch 5 years earlier. Elizabeth rose to her feet, smoothing her skirts and moving with practiced ease to the edge of the porch. Even after a decade of blindness, there were still moments when she wished she could see her children's faces, Quinn's smile, the ranch they had built together. But those moments were fleeting, quickly replaced by gratitude for all she had. The trip east to consult specialists had confirmed what Dr. Wilson had initially told her: her sight was gone permanently. The fire had scarred her corneas beyond repair. But by then, Elizabeth had already begun to see her life through different eyes, through Quinn's descriptions, through her own heightened senses, through the love that surrounded her. "There's my beautiful family," Quinn called as he dismounted. At 42, his voice was as strong and sure as it had been the day they met, though now it carried the easy authority of a man confident in his place in the world. Elizabeth heard his boots on the porch steps, and then his arms were around her, his kiss as warm and welcome as ever. "Missed you," he murmured against her hair. "You were only gone 3 hours, she teased, but her arms tightened around him all the same. 3 hours too long, Quinn replied. "Papa," Thomas demanded attention, tugging at Quinn's trouser leg. "Did you bring me anything from town?" Quinn chuckled, releasing Elizabeth to swing his son up into his arms. "As a matter of fact, I did, but first, let me say hello to my best girl." He set Thomas down and moved to Catherine, who accepted his hug with the slightly restrained dignity of a girl who considered herself nearly grown. "Uncle Will brought the mail," Catherine informed her mother importantly. "There's a letter for you from Boston." "From Aunt Gertrude, no doubt," Elizabeth said. Her relationship with her aunt had improved over the years, especially after Gertrude had visited following Catherine's birth. The elderly woman had been impressed by Elizabeth's capabilities and had become a regular correspondent, though she remained firmly committed to life in Boston. "Actually," Will said, approaching the porch, "it's from the Perkins Institute for the Blind. Looks official." Elizabeth's heart quickened. Several months earlier, she had written to the renowned school, offering her services as a correspondent for other adults who had lost their sight. Her own experience, she had reasoned, might help others adjusting to blindness. "Would you read it to me?" she asked, accepting the letter Will placed in her hands. Quinn guided her to the porch swing, sitting beside her as Will entertained the children with stories from town. With careful fingers, Quinn broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the paper within. "My dear Mrs. Jacobsen," he began reading. "Your letter of inquiry was brought to my personal attention, as your situation represents exactly the kind of experience our outreach program seeks to share with others affected by loss of sight in adulthood." Quinn continued reading, his voice growing increasingly animated as the letter went on. The director of the Perkins Institute not only welcomed Elizabeth's offer to correspond with newly blind adults, but invited her to contribute to a forthcoming book on adapting to blindness in rural settings, a subject rarely addressed in existing literature. "They want to pay you," Quinn exclaimed, his free hand squeezing hers excitedly. "For your writing and for reviewing their educational materials from the perspective of someone who lives outside a major city." Elizabeth sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the implications. They think I have something valuable to offer, she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. Something beyond my own household, I mean. Of course you do, Quinn replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You've been proving that for 10 years. Elizabeth leaned against him, profoundly grateful for this man who had never once doubted her capacity to contribute, to grow, to create a meaningful life despite what many would consider a debilitating disability. Should I accept? She asked, though in her heart she already knew the answer. I think you must, Quinn said simply. Think of all the people you could help, all the lives you could touch, just as Agnes once did. The mention of Quinn's sister brought a smile to Elizabeth's face. She would approve, wouldn't she? She'd be bursting with pride, Quinn confirmed. Almost as much as I am. That evening, after the children were in bed, Quinn and Elizabeth sat on the porch of their cabin, still their private retreat after all these years, though now connected to the main house by a covered walkway Quinn had built when Catherine was born. I wrote my acceptance letter this afternoon, Elizabeth told him, nestled against his side on the porch swing. Wilkin post it when he goes to town tomorrow. I'm proud of you, Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though not surprised, you've never backed away from a challenge. Elizabeth smiled, remembering the frightened young woman she had been, certain her life was over when darkness claimed her sight. I had a good teacher in that regard, she said, turning her face up to his. Quinn's lips found hers in a kiss still rich with passion after a decade of marriage. We taught each other, he said when they parted. And we keep teaching each other. That's what makes it work. Elizabeth nodded, contentment filling her as surely as the night air filled her lungs. The path from that burning house to this peaceful evening had been neither straight nor easy. There had been stumbles and setbacks, moments of frustration and even despair, but never once had she truly walked it alone. I'll be your eyes, Quinn had promised on that pivotal day so long ago. What neither of them had understood then was how much more they would become to each other, how their partnership would transform them both, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. What are you thinking about? Quinn asked, his fingers idly playing with a strand of her hair. Elizabeth smiled, leaning into his touch. I was thinking about vision, she said. About all the ways there are to see. Quinn's arm tightened around her shoulders. And what do you see, Elizabeth Jacobsen? Everything that matters, she replied simply. Everything that matters. As the stars wheeled overhead in a sky she would never again behold with her eyes, Elizabeth thanked God for the fire that had seemed to end her life, but had instead led her to this man, this family, this rich and purposeful existence. In losing her sight, she had gained a vision of life's possibilities that many with perfect eyes never achieve, a vision of love that transcends limitation, of partnership that transforms challenges into triumphs, and of a future limited only by the scope of their shared imagination. I love you, Quinn Jacobsen, she whispered into the gentle Colorado night. And I love you, came his unwavering reply, as certain as it had been the first time he spoke the words, as it would remain until their final breath. With everything I am and everything I will ever be. The darkness held no fear for Elizabeth anymore. Not with Quinn beside her, not with the life they had built together, not with all they had yet to share. For in that darkness, she had found her greatest light, the enduring flame of a love born in fire, tempered by challenge, and destined to illuminate their path forward together always.